It's really great to see so many familiar and some unfamiliar faces who care so much about South Africa. My name is John Taves. I'm the chair of the Comparative History of Ideas program. And I would like to welcome all of you to this seminar, a rather large seminar in our terminology, with Yazir Henri, veteran of the underground military wing of the anti-apartheid movement and currently a peace activist, director of the Direct Action Center for Peace and Memory. You'll find some of the brochures for his center outside, and I'm sure he'll be happy if you pick them up and think about donating some money to his organization. I would like to thank the College of Arts and Sciences and the Graduate School for providing the grant to the James Clouse Center for Conflict and Dialogue Studies, which made this visit possible. A fuller introduction to Yazir will follow in a minute, but I would first like to say a few brief words about the Clouse Center, since this seminar in many ways represents its official public inauguration. During the academic year 2001-2002, Jim Clouse led a group of 30 UW undergraduates on an exploratory and educational journey through three deeply divided societies, Northern Ireland, South Africa, and Cyprus, in order to examine the themes of memory and identity, conflict, and dialogue. From this program, there quickly emerged a cluster of thematically related activities in the Comparative History of Ideas program that we now refer to in a kind of shorthand as post-conflict studies. In the wake of Jim's premature and tragic death in March 2004, we thought it would be fitting to constitute a publicly visible focal point for these activities in a center named after him, a place for interdisciplinary conversation about conflict and dialogue, and for the organization of projects and practices that would mobilize individuals to address the problems of post-conflict cultural integration, civic peace, and social justice, both locally and globally. An academic center, of course, cannot replace the constant proliferation of grassroots and student-initiated activities that Jim originally inspired. It's a name we use to honor his legacy in what we do. Jim's wife is here. Erin, I won't make you stand up. We're happy to see her here. Theron Stevenson, the CHID Director of International Programs and Exchanges, was a student on that now almost legendary journey of 2001-2002, and it was during that trip that he and many others first met Yazir Henri. Theron has also been the primary organizer and coordinator of this visit, and he will introduce our guest from Cape Town. Before he does that, I should say that there will be a reception in Parrington Hall after the meeting in the Commons. I don't know if any of you know it. It's in the second floor of the building, which is just back there, one of the older buildings on campus. And also, I would like to point out again the brochures in front, which also include some other CHID activities that you might be interested in. Theron.
One more quick announcement. If we could ask everybody to turn off the ringers on their cell phones, we would quite appreciate that. So this is great. I'm so glad you're all here. The last time I spoke before an audience in Kane Hall, I was singing a song at a Jim Clouse memorial service. So it feels good and feels appropriate to be here the next time inaugurating the speaker seminar that's named after Jim. I'd also like to thank the students in the Peace and Conflict reading group that helped me organize this whole event. These students have educated themselves, and they've educated me by presenting on books and articles and organizations that they've researched in the areas of conflict and peace building, and they did a lot of work to help set up tonight. So thank you to Mark Baumforth, Haley Bavesi, Midge Brenner, Colleen Campbell, Jessica Enzi, Aditya Ganapathiraju, Greg Geyer, Jennifer Green, Hillary Holman, Brendan Impson, Ruth Marshall, Natalia Martinez-Paz, Cameron Summers, and Carol Weber. You guys have been great. So it's no easy task to introduce Yazir Henri. This is a man whose life is shaped by his insistence upon defining himself. He and his fellow soldiers who joined the liberation force known as Umkhonto we Sizwe, which is Spear of the Nation, They refused to adopt the identities that were assigned to them by the apartheid government. This was a government that concocted a wide range of identities that they used to define people with brown skin, all of which amounted to less than white. But by the actions of soldiers like Yazir, and by the negotiations of people like Archbishop Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, and by the pressure of multinational corporations and world governments who were finally brought into the light, in 1994, the oppressive apartheid regime was dismantled and put down. So that's a good thing. But despite a popularly elected government, apartheid does still exist in South Africa. This is a place where, for some people, simply sitting down to drink a cup of coffee in a restaurant is a provocative political act. It's not an exaggeration. So now, as the director of the Direct Action Center for Peace and Memory, Yazir Henri works with his comrades to claim their space in the world, to own their own histories. And one of the ways that they do this is by taking groups of students on journeys of remembrance throughout Cape Town, visiting places that mark the history of their liberation struggle, even if these histories have been left out of the official narrative of reconciliation and redemption in South Africa. So I met Yazir on one of these journeys of remembrance in the winter of 2002 when I was studying with the Identity, Memory, Conflict, and Dialogue program. There are a few others from that program in this room, and I'm glad to see them. But I've wanted to meet Yazir again ever since then. It was a moving experience. The tour was quite powerful, and our meeting with Yazir was enlightening and challenging. It was enlightening because after sharing his story of struggle and of survival, he told us that we helped him by listening. And it was challenging because he reminded us that simply listening is not enough. So when you ask one of our students who has met Yazir, what is Yazir like? A typical response would be, I don't know, man. He's intense. So I believe he was a bit horrified to learn that this is the one word we used to describe him when he met with our class yesterday at dinner. And we found that, in fact, Yazir is many things beyond simply intense. He is engaging, he's funny, he's curious. He also proved himself capable of quoting in a truly intellectual way Gordon Lightfoot's song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, no less than twice in the past 2 days, which I find quite impressive. So we explained to Yazir that we find him intense because he holds people accountable for the things that they say. And as Seattleites, we're used to being able to exchange pleasantries or thoughts that don't mean much or require us to follow up. Actually, I don't think this is really a Seattle thing. I think it would be wonderful if all across our country and across the world, more people, more administrators, more politicians were held accountable for the things that they say. So we can expect Yazir to elicit such clarity from you, from us, during the question and answer period that will follow his talk tonight. And we can expect him to be clear and unflinching while he shares his stories and his ideas with us. And it isn't enough simply to listen. Stories of struggle and survival have a purpose. And if we ask for these stories, we must incorporate that purpose into our own actions, into our teaching, into our writing, into our work, into our voting, etc. These histories do not belong to us. They belong to the people who lived them. So now, to tell his story, ladies and gentlemen, Yazir Henri.
My God. I wish I had learned the cards there. So it is daunting, so I'm a bit worried about that and flinching, but so don't mind me if I end up flinching once in a while. Okay. I'm a long way from home. Yeah, where it's easier to just be. I want to say thank you for introducing me in such a respectful and affirming manner. I want to greet everyone here tonight, students, staff, faculty, friends, colleagues, and people. So when I met Jim Close, I didn't think that I'd be standing here at this, in this way. So I wanted to say thank you for coming. And even if I just met him briefly, he touched me, and I know that he was a special man. Now, my talk tonight, as all my talks, as always when I speak and have the opportunity to speak, is dedicated to young combatants. Young people on the African continent and elsewhere, young people who have found themselves caught up in the wars of the governments, and young people who are already at war, sometimes before they are born. Those who learn war through the umbilical cords of their mothers. It is to them that I dedicate my words tonight. To young men and young women, dead and those alive, to those who fought, died, and to those who survived, to those who are still fighting, and especially to the dead that we will remember tomorrow. I want also to acknowledge young activists who have fought and who are fighting to end these type of wars. I wish to acknowledge those who struggle for peace when that struggle is romance. And I especially want to acknowledge those activists who struggle for peace when the struggle for peace is beyond romance and has become life in itself. To young people who have recognized in themselves the courage that to make a difference is to act. Sometimes the action that older peoples are too stuck, too afraid, or too harmed to make. So I want to give voice to the experience of this generation of my country as they speak to new and other generations that follow. Socially, after conflict, there's oftentimes haste to forget. Not only to forget the conflict, but also to forget those who viscerally viscerally remind us of what we have just done. So to the human beings who by mere living become our social conscious without having asked to, both in the symbolic and in the flesh, last month, the 10th anniversary of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and many of us flying across the world to speak of it, small and big alike, happy and angry alike. "12 years, as you have said, of our democracy. 12 years after 350 years of resistance and fighting. With guns, without them, with pens, with ink, with songs, with bodies. For me, when talking about my country's experience, the challenge is always to maintain my focus on the celebration. The celebration of life, of survival, of resistance, but especially the celebration of victory. And a victory that carries hope, that carried the hope that drove people like me and others beyond what we ourselves at times thought was humanly possible. But I do not want to forget the pain. In fact, I refuse to forget the pain. And I refuse because I have no choice not to forget it. I cannot forget the abjection, the toil, and the struggle that most people, ordinary in my country, face every day as normality. But as I've said, I do not want to just get lost in it. I want to balance this reality of abjection and sometimes of oblivion with hope and the strength and the laughter of what it means to also be victorious. They live together on the same slate, negative and positive, circle and triangle. Now, some people sometimes talk to me and ask me about having cheated death. Now, I want to say, I cannot talk about the cheating of death since I don't know death personally. If I did, I would not be here. In Seattle, or just here in front of the podium, looking and feeling the pounding of my heart and the racing of my blood. But I have, however, lived alongside and in close proximity to death. And I've seen death. I've seen it happening to others, and I felt it happening to others. So my responsibility is to have balance. Double-sided, double-edged. the last generation of soldier, survivor, resistor, with my responsibility as the first generation of soldier, survivor, peace builder. And in that, I have to explore what it means to have peace, its fragility, what the difference is between the larger peace process that we study and the smaller processing of peace that live on our bodies, that's evidenced in the lines of our skin as people, and all the things that make us human. Now, each time I'm given this privilege of voice, of speech, and of sharing, I feel in my body also the privilege of breath and breathing. So tonight, I wish to speak to you here about my life, as well as what makes me human, and the context in which humans such as ourselves live. My talk will sway backwards and forwards between the personal and the political, between the macro and the micro, between the activist and the intellectual, but mainly between the human and the historical, the now and the yesterday, and that middle point that allows its rocking backwards and forwards called the present. Today, this moment, this minute. And I want to speak about it with hope, and a hope that hopefully will give meaning to an experience of so many ordinary men and women might travel across the world possible. Now, I know many of you have been to my country, and I must probably assume that many of you have not. Some of you might be from it. Now, South Africa. And the miracle of what people call the commission. There's a story that many of you are familiar with, including myself. South Africa, a country divided by race, two sides at war, no clear victory, no sight, no clear end, no defeat, no possibility. Two great men, and they agree to end it. One black, one white, it ends in settlement. The settlement leads to peace. And then we have this thing called the commission. All is guilty, hence we're all innocent. This is the version of events that I tell you is true. It's not a lie. But it's only one version of history and complexity that makes this thing true, that creates truth. Now, what I want to speak to you here tonight about is the modest word, that thing that we don't easily just explain away quickly. The ordinary experience when history becomes embodied in the individual and the collectives that we as individuals create, we foster, sometimes violently, sometimes it just happens. When I was asked by Theron, so how does one take up the decision? Perfectly organized color-coded, geographically specific, economically disorganized, socially distorted, psychologically unequal, militarized, and in short, almost violently normal. So consequences. Consequences that we still are only beginning to process right now. Whether we give you the nice story or the bad story or the one in the middle or the one on the two edges, we're still dealing and we're still processing what peace means right now on the bodies of generations of human beings, on our country, but also like children thinking that playing God is not so difficult. In fact, it's easy, it's here, right now. Now I'm constructing a story. I know that. And I'm simplifying and I'm leaving out chunks of reality and information. Those types of hell that we create as human beings with pretty laws and lies that say they include fair play, the Geneva Conventions, and the delusion that we are so, and makes no sense. Now, when we returned to our country, we crossed the borders of other countries, Angola, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Botswana, South Africa, Cape Town, a quarter continent away. The local conditions South Africa in the midst, in the throes of war, an extended uprising in my city, in my country. In 1989, at the end of the war, a period of heightened violence and brutality. I hope you guys are not, don't worry about me shaking a little bit, just to keep my rhythm. Talking about these issues are not easy. And I repeat, I leave out large chunks and I simplify. My arrest and my father as shield, 3 cordons and hundreds of police and soldiers in a civilian community. Shaking hands and celebrating. Now, the steel muzzles were cool against my skin. And my thoughts had disappeared and I had become numb. This might sound strange, but I was overcome by a willingness to die. My life felt ended and I was ready to go. It seemed the fair and logical thing. I had spent 2 years previously preparing myself for it. I had had many hours of wondering what it would feel like, and I had imagined it countless of times. During my training, I had rehearsed it, and I had taught others how to rehearse it. So I thought I knew everything. But if I did, I would not be here now. And I would not want to speak about it and share and travel to speak about what no one should be submitted to. Not then in my country during that time, and not now anywhere, whether it's in Argentina or anywhere else. And I use Argentina as an example because at that time they had similar laws that were said to be pretty and accepted. So I could not conceive of the reality of arrest in the way that I thought was simple, of detention and of torture. Now, what I want to share with you here is not the physical experience of detention, the sensational stuff that make you feel as if it were happening to you on your body right now. Rather, the more spiritual and the existential experience of having your humanity systematically broken and destroyed. The texture of violence, the many colors it has when the less tangible things become real, in the life that it has after recovery of broken skin, in the life that it has after the recovery of broken skin. For when in the context of violence and torture does not allow for bullet holes through the back of the head, then it is still created to kill the living, the detained, human beings alive behind bars. It is in the end these extreme forms of human interaction that is intended to totally shatter the core being and all that makes living meaningful and all that makes life worthful and all that makes life worthwhile. To create the place where innocence does not exist, where innocence cannot exist. It is in this place, in this moment, extended indefinitely, where you long for death and it doesn't come. Where you, along with your torturer, is lost to humanity, almost as one being. When the war extends itself to your body and lives in your mind and plays out like a pantomime without any actors. So their task was to turn me against myself and against my own and against all that I believed. The very reason for the existence. Given up in the moment that they had to kill. So it would be done as a metaphor through killing my belief in the people, my family, my country, and my life. By making me an accessory to death, they destroyed not one life, but two at once. They succeeded in turning me against me, but failed in turning me against my own. Now, when I say this, it's not to rescue me. For when we use the word betrayal glibly, it is an impossible sentence. The betrayal of a soldier can be an impossible sentence. It is in this technology of warfare that ordinary people easily take for granted the intensity of it. It is in this prison that exists where hell comes about. When death is just a pawn in the games that we humans play with each other, in moments when in fact, the fact that we are human no longer matters. It is when we are able to destroy and justify the destruction of another person by the mere looking. And consequently, the blow that follows. Now, the reason I talk about this is because I want to talk about it. And because I have to talk about it. It is because the choosing of lives of the innocent and the possibility of the death of a comrade. It is here when choice has a fracture. When in each direction there is an answer and it's not the one you want. When the mere saying of between a rock and a hard place no longer exists. When putting it into words makes no sense. It is here when I wish to switch off the television and to pray that all I have to do is wake up sweating. And it was just a dream. But once you've lived through this, it is when you hope for a day when there are no movies that oversimplify the meaning of torture. That makes simple war and peace, that expresses itself only in the binary of either or. But I mean, I survived and came through prison and was released and was set up. What happened in those last days when they couldn't just kill you was to kill you by releasing you into your own communities to be killed. So my hell continued after being released from prison as a living nightmare played in slow motion. And you see it done in the movies. You know that moment when things draw out slowly. Slowly, and then become an eternity. When life becomes a nightmare and you can't sleep. This is when the idea of death becomes internalized, and your battle every day externally is not to give in to it. Then, just then, in that moment. It's when recovery becomes your own search for humanity. You're looking. So for me to stand here as part of my responsibility for being alive, I've had to recover. I've had to recover me, and I've had to recover others. And in my recovery, it is in my recovery that I refuse my torturer's victory over me and on my body. And I've had to clasp my hand in a tight fist. And I've had to run my knuckles metaphorically over tarred pavements and believe that the insides of me that previously housed a soul could be recovered, revitalized, like someone saved from days in the desert with little droplets over parched lips, slowly accepting life. This thing is crazy. So the process of gathering the inner shards of my existence, the innocence of my humanity, I would argue, was almost as brutal as the process of losing it. Enjoying the taste of life as political victory can easily be hollow when you have seen the cost. Now, what about this commission? The commission that we all talk about and study and read and write about. Tonight, I do not want to look at it politically, in a macro sense. Just personally in the micro, because my testimony at this commission was the first step to recovery. Breaking the silence, my silence publicly shaped the very way in which I was to emerge from this lonely place called hell. It freed me from the now defunct, defeated apartheid security apparatus and forces. Giving into my tears, allowing myself to feel, to share my pain, was the political act of waking up from this sweating. One of the possibilities that the Human Rights Violation Committee of this commission offered me, and I took out of desperation. The complexity of the Archbishop's tears, and some of you have met him. Put those things. Yeah. The complexity of the Archbishop's tears and the smoke filtering into my lungs from the then Deputy President, now our President's pipe, cannot be put into words. Straight, simple, factual. For me, they both became mixed into a balm that I used to begin my own recovery. After which I've had over several years to rip from inside violently the blonde hair, and the blue eyes of those who shared my detention. That became seared in the very core of me. Exercising the torturer and the prison walls has been the key to me seeing and accepting that human beauty continues to exist despite horror, in spite of horror. And that in the most darkest of moments, other things exist also. All we have to do is to look and look hard and find it and grab and grasp and pull sometimes. So it was in this place where detention came to settle, in the place where I should have had a soul. It's when the technology of detention and violence makes you the torturer and turns you into the prison. It's in this very place of existence that makes torture and detention a refrain that I don't like seeing or hearing. And when I speak about it to say that it shouldn't be. Not then, not now, and not tomorrow, and not with any nice words that creates laws that says it's okay. Because it left me at war with myself. It left me with having the security police winning daily victories over me as I battered myself. Making peace and accepting that the war was over wasn't easy, still isn't. But I want to argue here that it was the beginning of me coming to terms with the fact that I survived while so many of my comrades did not. We're not so fortunate. It is here that the responsibility to the dead eventually turned me back onto a path that made me responsible to those alive, living. Accepting my comrades dead, and that there was nothing that I can do to bring them back, or anything that we can do to change this fact. Letting go of this is the hardest thing. Allowing their dreams to come back into my life and to possess the very core of me was pretty scary, because it meant that it wasn't over, and that I couldn't go and just disappear into nowhere land. That I had to find the victory and immerse myself in its scalding waters. It is in these waters that burnt me that I learned that we grow new skin. Small victories every day consolidate survival and allow us slowly all the time to reconstruct humanity. One at a time, sometimes when it's hard, but more at a time when it's not so hard, when the moment allows us to feel strong and it's easy to take a stand. So the struggle for peace and dignity as an African as you said, as a man slightly less than white, is not over for me. Coming to accept the fact that the world is actually not such a good place. Coming to accept the fact that the world is not such a good place was hard at first. In fact, I didn't want to accept it. I wanted the world to be a good place, where everything was fine. Can you stop that photographs now, please? Thank you. I mean, that's enough. I haven't moved. Okay. Thanks. Thinking that the world is a good place, is what we all want. I want it. But coming to accept that it's not such a good place for everyone helps me to wake up every morning smiling. It gives me the reason to live, it gives me meaning, and it gives me meaning in a place where sometimes meaning is meaningless. To breathe freedom. To breathe freedom cannot be underrated. And I feel strongly that more people should breathe it, should taste it. Should immerse themselves in the hot waters that burn your skin of this thing that's called freedom. The breathing of freedom every day is special. The organization that I run in Cape Town is one such example, where its breath filters through into walls and onto office desks and into vehicles that run on petrol. I mean, its mere existence is worth celebrating in a context where it's easy to cry. in my city, as you have said, and a lot of you know, that there are people less fortunate than I. Where apartheid as a legacy has not ended, where we are still divided by race in an extreme economy, where the disparity of wealth between rich and poor, for anybody who is prepared to open his or her heart, who is prepared to look, and who is prepared to think, is devastating. Where giving up means at worst to die slowly outside of the spotlight of what we call the international community. It is in this context where every act matters. In the face of this objection, these challenges do not produce any easy victories. But that doesn't mean that there are no victories. And that these victories need to be cherished, they need to be celebrated and supported. And there are many in this room that do support some of them. When people choose to hope when there is little hope, when people choose to sing when there is little to sing about, and when people choose to fight for a peace only because they have learned that it is better than war, then it must be celebrated. Initially, I found that this celebratory dance and feeling was not so easy, and that celebrating life in the context of so much hardship is really hard work. But I found it to become easier with time and practice, and over time, this practice in itself becomes important and needs to be celebrated. I want to start towards concluding. The reclaiming of spirit, of hope, and of dignity is what drives us, still today on the streets of Cape Town. Not the fact that we believe that everybody died for nothing. The time of the everyday, the time of development, I would argue, has a different temporality to the time of mourning, to the time of self-reclamation, and to the time of recovery. Especially that recovery if it's from a continuous war on spirit and on peoplehood. The challenge of slowing down and making sense of what this new moment of peace means must neither be taken for granted nor lost to the socio-economic sliding towards another violent fracture. Claiming back hope, giving time to reclaim back time from the objective zones of pessimism and fracture to co-create collective spaces for the practices of recovery. And peace is also, in my context, right now, to resist this machine that we call development. So I would argue that peace must always include a plan to repair the lives and communities of those who were destroyed, that it needs time and it needs money, and it should be invested into the areas where apartheid caused most of its damage, to the souls of the destroyed, as much as the buildings. Our war against humanity during that time was every day and all the time, on the bus, on the pavement, in the street, at the threshold of that coffee shop that you speak of. So for us today, peace action specifically entails the rebuilding of lives, the opening up and the insertion of spaces for mourning, and the reclamation of the self as a political economy. Against the political economy of globalization and the constant pressure to rush on and quickly and make as if nothing happened. For me, you've asked, what does peace mean? The peace that I feel will endure should not dissipate into the mirage beyond this present time of pausing and breathing. The memory and celebration of resistance resides precisely in acknowledging the possibility of reflecting this in time. How else will the hope for a time of peace that was carried so fervently at the height of resistance against apartheid be sustained into the present and its tomorrows? For me, peace is more than a creation of a lager of secured, exclusive spaces of residence, economic opportunity, consumerism, and leisure in which previous colonial and apartheid beneficiary classes, as well as a few others, I have to admit, are able to enjoy the fruits of so much pain and sorrow. It is in the interest of sustaining peace, as well as in the interest of the beneficiaries of these previous systems of oppression and atrocity, that we all act, including them, responsibly. If the history of their making is to avoid an ineluctable, I struggle with this big word sometimes, an ineluctable repetition, so that an active working through of the damage that we have lived is possible. That the active working through of damage that people live is possible. Whether it's on the streets of Cape Town or on the south side of Chicago, or it's in the memory of Wounded Knee Creek. For me, it is easier to clutch at sharp thorns on offer when the rose bush presents itself than it is to smell the roses and imagine the thorns away. We do this easily, quickly. We imagine that there are no thorns and that there are only sweet smells. But when you've come back from objection, it's not possible, even if you want to. And sometimes, believe me, I want to. Sustainable peace in a country that has known only war is only possible when that country is able to come to terms with itself, to face itself in all the splendor that comes with its horror. The South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission gave us the opportunity to begin this process. Now we have to take it up and live it. Since I've been here, there's been much talk of forgiveness and this word. Forgiveness, if such a thing, is at all politically possible beyond the understanding of just me and you, I feel must grow socially, out of a full remembering, not out of a selective process of amnesia. If out of bitterness we are to be able to derive the necessary understanding and wisdom and strength to put the world to live in peace and at peace, then that world should, and I argue, can be far stronger than the world that might give expression to other emotions of anger and bitterness and hatred and revenge. The Commission. Whether in South Africa, Argentina, or Guatemala, when the words "never again" where the words "nunca más" or the words "ni vida" exist, they must be more than just words, just glib words to justify plasters pasted over festering wounds. Never again must mean that the violence of war must stop. And not just for those who benefit from the peace, but for everyone. And if we do not act with intention to do that, then let us not use those words. It is more honest. Those of us who have to recover people from objection, it's easy to explain that to them. Let us not use these words if we do not mean to actively ensure them extended to every distended stomach, crying, demanding to be at peace. It is more honest. Let us not use those words. Now, it is this globalization of humanity that I dream of and support, where I don't have to switch on the television and see just another killing and just another bomb and just another soldier thinking that killing is okay. In this remote controlled second where life, my life, lives itself over and over again. It is here that sits my and our responsibility as people, as human beings, outside of color and outside of religion. Regardless of passports and regardless of privilege, to make peace longer and more real than just another national, just another global moment. In my country, we continue 12 years after the war. We continue in this quest, in this oftentimes quickly forsaken ideal and belief that humanity will and has to find an alternative to resolving itself through war. And I know that there are many here who share with me in this dream. I can see it in your smiles and in your eyes and in the seriousness of the silence. So despite my own personal experience, I have to fight with myself to remember always that butterflies have color and that they will always be beautiful regardless of what we as human beings do to each other. And by saying so that my own life will have meaning beyond the confines of my skin and my world, and that I will continue in the belief that I will be able to laugh with as much intensity as I am able to cry, and that it is just that okay. Now, I've chosen to stay in the metaphor. The facts we can discover in libraries and books if we are drawn to them. I want to end my talk this evening, my discussion, my plea. I thought about the fact that I needed to do it on a light note so that I don't leave here with a whole auditorium thinking that I'm just that intense. But I fail, I'm sorry. So, like I began this discussion that I hope will continue, I want to end in dedication to the forgotten soldier. In this case, he was a young man with a little frame and could just as easily have been me. So I will read you a poem. I'm not sure whether it's in keeping with academic style, but because this is the first one, hopefully there is no precedent. So I will do it. This poem is called Kidogo, the spelling of which is irrelevant, but it means little. I realize now why I've been doing all of this, was to keep with a mic. So it's your fault. Okay. If I had that thing here, I could have been walking and I wouldn't have to bounce up and down and try to get this angle right. And keep all of you here without leaving me alone talking to myself. Kidogo. Too tiny whose flesh heaped I remember. Too tiny whose flesh heaped I remember across a mounted machine gun, lifeless. Too tiny. Nevertheless, we barked. Nevertheless, we barked. We chanted freedom, young boys, 16-year-olds. We chanted freedom, young boys, 16-year-olds with guns, 16-year-olds with hopes of sanity. Too tiny, my tears. To you, my dreams. Too tiny, my childhood, whose face shattered, bleeding bullet holes, whose face shattered, bleeding bullet holes, and whose silent scream etches itself onto paintings at night. Bleeding bullet holes, gaping through humankind. Too tiny, my brother, and to those worms who caressed your corpse when you displaced those who slept in graves that could bear no more. I remember your belt, intact with my fingers sweating with the tears my eyes refused. I remember your belt intact. When I did not acknowledge the bones we broke so that we could bury you, we gritted our teeth and we held our stomachs real teeth and real hair. We stood up straight and we looked into the heavens and we imagined what it would be like to be just good soldiers. I remember your belt intact as it left my waist. My brother, I remember you smiling. So tiny. Now they call us kidogos with no politics. But that is only in the 90s. In the 80s, we scooped out skulls with politics. I remember you, my brother. And I hope that others will remember you too. Smiling. Just that smiling. I hope that it's in the tension of silences like these that we will be able to find those moments and reflect. Not only the answers, but also the means and the mechanisms that allow us to extend our humanity to each other. I imagined what a blank page looks like with only a full stop. And what the challenge looks like to fill it with all of us, side by side and hand in hand, from Cape Town to Seattle, and from Seattle to Beijing. I hope that my words have meaning, and I thank the CHID program again. And I thank you for coming and filling this auditorium with me. That we find a way, despite the darkness, to make life light. Despite the missing ones and the disappeared, to smile. You know, when we meet beautiful people along the way. So thank you very much.